Welcome to Crime Files TikTok Compilations, the vault of real horror, where murder isn't fiction and the footage never lies. In this collection, we unearth chilling clips, haunting case files, and real-life moments that expose the darkest corners of the human mind. What you're about to witness is raw, unsettling, and unforgettable. These aren't stories, they're warnings.
This is one of the darkest cases I've ever covered on my podcast, and if you're eating, I invite you to stop. Taylor Parker was born in 1992 in Texas, and she grew up not getting along with her mother, Shauna. Big family rivalry, they do not get along. In 2019, she's 27, and in true Texas form, she meets a guy at a rodeo. His name is Wade Griffin, and he works at a roofing company, but his family had a hog farm, so on the side, he would help hog trap and manage livestock. Taylor and Wade stayed in touch mostly through Instagram, and one day Taylor asked him to do an estimate on clearing and fencing some land in Bryan's Mill, Texas. You see, Taylor's family is rich. She has that oil and gas money, but her mom Shauna is the executor, and she really pulls the purse strings on Taylor's spending. Taylor couldn't access the funds herself, so her uncle Butch, again so Texas, would help her out and send her money when she needed it, which caused tension between he and Shauna. So the family dynamic is murky at best, very complicated. But this particular property Taylor was maintaining for the family, and again, she asked Wade to come quote the clearing and fencing, and before long, they're having dinners together and meeting each other's families. Wade's family loved Taylor. They thought she was sweet and outgoing and had a good head on her shoulders, which is great because in August 2019, she found out she was pregnant. Even though they'd only been dating a couple of months, she was amped, but sadly, they lost the baby in a tragic accident while working on farm equipment. After that, Taylor and Wade became even closer and wanted a fresh start and really get their ducks in a row for their future. So she was playing with the idea of an investment property, and Wade told her about this property called Pecan Point, which is this sprawling piece of land that's in the northeastern part of Texas and actually goes into Oklahoma. Wade knew the owner, and it had great duck hunting, which could be a good source of income for them, so Taylor agreed to go see it, and she loved it. It was a ton of acreage and was on the market for $4.7 million, and they put in an offer for $3.5 million with $250,000 down. But again, her mom was not going to take this lightly. This was going to be a battle. On top of that, Wade bought an ATV for $29,000 and a $92,000 pickup truck, which isn't the smartest when Shauna has to approve these purchases, but whatever. Not my circus, not my monkeys. Her uncle Butch assured her that it would be fine and sets up a separate account for her and periodically puts oil and gas royalties in it. So essentially everything they bought was financed and with the intent of paying it off later. By this point, Taylor moves in with Wade, and February 2020, she finds out she's pregnant again. And again, she's so excited. They did the whole thing, pregnancy pics, a big gender reveal at their friend's house where a calf came out into the crowd wearing a pink ribbon, the Texas of it all. They even announced her name, which was going to be Clancy Gale Griffin. Then Shauna starts up again. She was radio silent for a little bit, but she started back up with phone calls and texts about how Taylor's going to be a shitty mom and would call Wade from anonymous numbers, berating him about how he's just in it for the money and will make sure that he doesn't see a dime of it and all this stuff. Once, Wade even got a text from Taylor's ex claiming that she wasn't even pregnant and that she's insane and all this stuff. So they actually get burner phones, block her on social media. They don't have time for this. Taylor is due at the end of September, and they don't have time for that bullshit. So that summer, they spend prepping for baby Clancy. As the due date's getting closer and closer, she was getting more and more stressed and confided in her friend, Reagan Hancock. Well, September 30th, which was the due date, comes and goes, so Taylor's OB set her induction date for October 5th. And that morning, she and Wade ran out to do some errands, and before going to the hospital, they came back to their house, and it was on fire. It wasn't in full flames, but it was enough to ruin some crucial belongings, and it knocked out the power and plumbing, so they couldn't live there, especially with a newborn. The fire department determined it was done with a lighter, and someone started it under the house. So creepy. So they moved the induction date back to noon the following day, and now they plan to move in with Wade's mom with their new baby. The next morning comes, and Taylor and Wade were actually planning to go sell some hogs to some dude in Wynwood, Oklahoma, which is a few hours away. This is very ill-advised to do the day you're having a baby, so Reagan doesn't go, but insists Wade does to not lose the sale. He's reluctant, but Taylor says it's fine because she'll go get them registered and all that crap you have to do at the hospital, and they can just meet there right before noon. So he leaves the house around 4 a.m. and he pulls up to Scott Robinson's house in Wynwood, Oklahoma, only to be told that he didn't know what the hell Wade was talking about. He said he was in the market for hogs, but he didn't confirm a purchase with anyone yet. Wade shows Scott the text that he supposedly sent him and Taylor, and Scott says that's not even his number. Wade immediately knows that Shauna is behind this and is likely going to jail because it's illegal to cross state lines with livestock. So now he's pissed because this means he's probably going to miss the birth of his daughter, but little did he know, he was going to miss it anyway. Because around 9:30 that morning, Taylor was getting pulled over in DeKalb, Texas for hauling ass and driving erratically. She calls 911 and says, "There's a state trooper behind me, but my baby is coming out, so I am not pulling over." Taylor was at a Walmart in New Boston, Texas, getting new things for the baby to replace the ones that were lost in the fire, and she started having contractions. She abandoned her car and was racing to the hospital in Idabel, Oklahoma, which is almost an hour away, and she was about 30 minutes out when she gets pulled over. The dispatcher calls for an ambulance and tells Taylor help is on the way, but she needs to pull over. Sorry in advance for the next few seconds. By the time the officer gets to her window, there is blood everywhere and her newborn baby is out with the umbilical cord protruding from her soaked yoga pants. The baby seems to be having trouble breathing, so the dispatcher is still on the line and walking Taylor through CPR while the officer is also on the phone with LifeNet dispatch to get the exact locations for the ambulance. An off-duty nurse was nearby and heard the commotion, and she ran over to see if she could help, and she told Taylor they need to cut off her yoga pants because of potential blood clots. So they put her in the back of the trooper's car, and when she gets them off, the placenta falls out. I said sorry. They load her on a gurney and they take her to McCurtain Memorial Hospital in Idabel, Oklahoma. One of the nurses does a postpartum ultrasound to see if there's any internal bleeding, and they are shocked to see that Taylor doesn't have a uterus because Taylor had a hysterectomy in 2015. Can you imagine the chill that went down that nurse's spine? My God. So the only reason they did an ultrasound is because Taylor refused the vaginal exam, which is a standard practice to make sure there's no hemorrhaging. So the nurse was already iffy on Taylor, and when she saw that there was no uterus, she plays it cool. Then she runs to the OB and tells him that the baby she brought in is not hers. He instructs the nurse to get a blood sample to test for HCG, which is the hormone your body produces when pregnant, and it stays with you weeks after you give birth. They see 0 levels of HCG in her body because this bitch was never pregnant, so the doctors call the police. Police tell them not to let her leave under any circumstances because it just so happens that earlier that morning, they found the body of a murdered pregnant woman whose baby was missing, Reagan Hancock. Yep, Taylor's friend. The entire story of how this went down is truly one of the most batshit things I've ever heard, but I just realized how quickly my time is running out, so I'm going to skip all the brutal details. Go to episode 143 of the podcast for the full story, though. Cops rush to the hospital and question Taylor, and she's maintaining that she didn't kill anybody. Yes, the obnoxious accent. That's how she talks because she's a dumb redneck, and that's coming from an Alabama native. She agrees to a vaginal exam, and the OBGYN walks in and walks out no more than 2 seconds later and says, "A baby didn't come out of there." Duh. It's shocking that she thought she would get away with this. This bitch failed anatomy. Wade eventually gets to the hospital having no idea that his partner was actually behind the entire hog transaction situation, and it was her who catfished him into getting him out of town so she could commit murder and obtain a baby while he was away. There is no oil and gas money. There is no Uncle Butch. The first pregnancy, also fake, obviously. Her and her mother never had a bad relationship. Shauna said she never sent a nasty text, never called her. In fact, the only legit text was from her ex texting Wade to say she's insane, she's not pregnant, because he knew she had a hysterectomy in 2015. Demon had so much more to tell y'all. She does get the death penalty. Go to the episode. It's insane.
This is still one of the craziest true crime stories I have ever heard of. Greg Flanagan was described as a kind and compassionate man. His friends said that he would not only give the shirt off his back, he would also give the shoes off his feet. Greg lived in Lafayette, Louisiana, but he would often travel to Beaumont, Texas. I know I said it wrong. Go ahead and correct me in the comments. For work. He and his brother had started an oil company that was massively successful. So during the weekends, he would travel home to be with his wife in Lafayette, and then he would go back to Beaumont during the week and stay at the Elegante Hotel. Greg was very much a creature of habit. Anytime he got to his hotel room, he would crank up the AC, get a couple candy bars because he had a sweet tooth, lay on the bed and watch TV and smoke a lot of cigarettes. And every morning he would call his wife on his way to work. Any change in this schedule would be very unusual. On September 16th of 2010, Greg's wife did try calling him when he should have been on his way to work. When he didn't answer, she knew something was very wrong, so she tried calling his coworkers, hoping that maybe he had gone into work early that day, but when they hadn't seen him, she asked that they go to his hotel room and check on him. And when they got to the hotel room and knocked on the door and there was no answer, they knew something was very wrong. They had the hotel manager open up the door, and that's when they found Greg's body. Police started investigating immediately. This is where the case gets super weird. The hotel room didn't look like there had been a struggle inside. Greg still had his ring. He still had his wallet, which had $1,000 cash inside of it. So robbery was very quickly ruled out. The rest of the guests were interviewed and nothing seemed amiss. None of the other guests said that they saw or heard anything. So police started checking into Greg's past and seeing if there was someone that was out to get him, but there just wasn't anybody. Greg was someone that got along with everyone, and he was just kind. As far as Greg's body, it seemed perfectly intact. Apart from an abrasion on his cheek, it looked like he got out of bed and fell down and he got rug burn on his cheek. So not long into this investigation, his body was released to the coroner, and this is where things get even weirder. Apart from the abrasion on his cheek, the coroner only noticed a small abrasion on his scrotum. But once he looked deeper into Greg's body, he saw severe trauma. The coroner said that he only saw trauma like this in victims of car accidents or if something very heavy had fallen on somebody. He had a laceration on his liver, he had several broken ribs, and he even had a hole in his heart. The coroner said this could only have happened from a severe beating. And yet the outside of Greg's body looked completely fine. I'll get into more in part 2. Here is part 2 to the case of Greg Flanagan. Even though the autopsy report revealed something very strange was going on, the investigators could not figure it out, and it seemed like Greg's case was going to go cold. Greg's wife absolutely refused to accept this, so she reached out to private investigator Ken Brenham. Ken went to Lafayette, Louisiana to talk to Greg's wife, and there he asked her if there was anything strange about the room that she had noticed. She did say that she noticed that the air conditioning was off, and this was very unusual for Greg. Through this process, Ken was able to find out that the night that Greg had died, he was trying to microwave a bag of popcorn, and something malfunctioned, and this caused the power to go out in not only Greg's room, but in his neighboring room. So Ken decided that maybe this had led to an altercation between the men that were staying in the other room. They were a group of men from Wisconsin who were working in Beaumont for they were electricians. There were 3 men staying in the room, but Lance Mueller and Tim Steitzman were the important ones to remember. When they had first been interviewed the day after the crime had happened, they were completely forthcoming with police officers, going as far as giving their cell phones in case the officers had any more questions. Ken realized that Greg had been in a locked room completely by himself. There was no struggle to be seen or anything like that, but he knew something had happened between the 2 rooms. That's when they decided to go back to the Elegante Hotel and do a little further searching. While they looked deeper into the hotel room, they found a bullet hole that was leading from the room that the electricians were staying in into Greg's room. So Ken and the detective on the case decided to go to Wisconsin and interview the electricians further. Tim Steitzman would be the one to be interviewed first, and he told investigators that while they were relaxing after work in their room, they had been drinking, and one of them decided to go get a gun from one of their work trucks. While they were messing around with this gun, Lance Mueller dropped it and the gun accidentally fired. He said they tried listening into the other room for a while, but they didn't hear anything. They then decided to go back down to the bar and continue drinking, and when they came back upstairs to their room, they thought they heard someone cough in the room next door, so they figured nothing bad had happened. But what investigators were able to find out is that this bullet went through the walls between the 2 rooms, entered into Greg's body from his scrotum, bounced around his body, which caused all of this trauma and eventually led to his death. Lance Mueller was arrested and charged with manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years. But just thinking about how this case happened is such a strange turn of events and just coincidence upon coincidences, and how it was eventually figured out just absolutely blows my mind.
What is one true crime case that you just can't stop thinking about? I always wonder what really happened to 6-year-old Catherine Korzelius. On August 7th, 1996, Catherine, along with her mom Nancy and her brother Chris, were out running errands. Catherine's dad was Paul Korzelius, who at the time was the tour manager for John Bon Jovi. That day was Paul's birthday, so they were all out looking for a present for him. They all lived on Elder Circle, which is a small neighborhood near Austin, Texas. When they got back to Elder Circle, Catherine wanted to pick up the mail from the community mailbox and then walk home. The mailboxes were only about an eighth of a mile from their home, and Catherine had done this a few times before, so her mom let her. Catherine would take the shorter route home, while her mom and brother would take the longer route around Elder Circle. This way, they would be getting home at almost the same time. But once Nancy and Chris got home with still no sign of Catherine, Nancy sent Chris to go and look for her. But when Chris couldn't find her, Nancy started searching for her by car. Within minutes, they found her laying in the middle of the road on Elder Circle. She was unconscious but still breathing. According to Nancy, she didn't want to make her daughter lay on the hot pavement, so she picked her up and took her to the hospital. Little Catherine suffered from a fractured skull and never regained consciousness, and sadly, she died later that day. Authorities initially thought that Catherine was a victim of a hit and run, but certain things didn't add up. Where Catherine's body was found was in an unusual spot. Her mom last saw her walking towards their house, but her body was found a little over a mile away from their home in the opposite direction that she was supposed to have gone. Catherine's body was actually found along the route that her mom and brother took to get home, and the autopsy only deepened the mystery. The autopsy showed that Catherine didn't die from a hit and run. Along with her head injury, she also had abrasions on her left shoulder, lower back, right hip, and her knees. The ME found that Catherine had either jumped, fallen, or was thrown from a moving vehicle. One theory investigators came up with was that Catherine maybe tried to hold on to the back of her mom's car on the drive home, but fell off. This would explain the location of where her body was found. But her family did not believe this, so they hired a PI. The PI noted that it was a really hot summer day, and at the time, Catherine's left thumb was broken and in a splint, so it would have been really difficult for her to hold on to anything. And it's likely her mom would have seen her in the rearview mirror. Catherine's family believes she was abducted and murdered. After her death, investigators brought in a canine unit that tracked her scent to a vacant lot 30 yards from the mailboxes, but it was lost after that. This sparked a theory that Catherine was approached by an attacker at the mailboxes, ran into the lot, was caught and thrown into a car, struck in the head, and then was thrown out of the vehicle where she was found. Nancy also stated that it appeared her daughter's body was laid out for her to find. Her hair was smoothed down, her clothes were straight, and her sandals were still on. Unfortunately, there's never been any answers in this case, and it's still labeled a suspicious death. John Bon Jovi wrote a song dedicated to Catherine called August 7, 415. And sadly, in March of 2020, Catherine's brother Chris, who grew up to be a police officer, was tragically killed in a car accident.
He's one of the most terrifying and prolific serial killers in modern day history. He was always seen as this really charming guy when in reality he was a deeply disturbed individual with mommy issues. Sean Great was the youngest of 3 and grew up in Ohio. His parents' marriage was very violent and toxic. They were always fighting. Sean was never very close with either of his parents, but the relationship between Sean and his mother was really, really bad. His mom was a big partier, a heavy drinker. She abused substances. His mom would leave for days at a time, just leaving her kids home alone. Sean was just very neglected as a child, and he learned from a very young age that he only got attention from his parents when he acted out. When Sean was only 11 years old, his mom left her children without warning and without a goodbye. When Sean was only 14 years old, he began abusing substances and alcohol to numb the pain. When Sean was 16 years old, his mom just returned home out of the blue after 5 years with barely even a "I'm sorry" or an explanation. At 16 years old, this was the first time in Sean's life that he ever fantasized about killing someone. Sean was a very angry kid with mommy issues, and he took it all out on innocent people. It's been said that Sean was a very charming guy who had no trouble getting girls, especially when he was younger. But Sean was an incredibly abusive partner. A lot of people said it was like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of situation. On the outside, Sean seemed really nice and charming and generous, when in reality, he was a very vile, narcissistic, abusive, and controlling and manipulative man. Sean was also a deadbeat dad. Sean had 2 kids with 2 different moms by the time he was 22 years old. He first became a dad when he was only 18 years old, and then when he was 22 years old, he got a 17-year-old girl pregnant. He was always a very abusive partner, but with this poor 17-year-old girl, it was on a whole different level. He attacked her multiple different times while she was pregnant with his kid. He attempted to kill her once. He also kidnapped her and her sister and SA'd her. When Sean was only in his early to mid 20s, he had already been arrested multiple times and been in and out of prison. These were for all different kinds of charges: burglary, domestic violence, multiple times, kidnapping, but he was never in jail long. It was always from 1 month to 3 years. Before Sean even turned 30 years old, he committed his first murder. It was 2005 and Sean was at his mom's house. 23-year-old single mom of 2, Dana Lowry, was going door to door selling magazines. Sean lured Dana into his car, took her to the place that he was staying at. He killed her with a sharp weapon, and then he disposed of her body on the side of a road and then set her body on fire. Sadly, it took a very long time to identify Dana's body. She was a Jane Doe for a very long time. She was so young. She had a family. She had 2 children that for a very long time thought that she just up and vanished one day. And Sean had gotten away with murder. He had an inflated ego and a god complex. Sean ended up getting married for a little bit. He got married, and with his wife, he had a 3rd child, but within months of getting married, his wife took the child and left him for good, so you can only imagine how that went, considering it was only a couple months into their marriage. And then in March of 2015, 10 years after killing Dana, Sean killed for the 2nd time. He had befriended this woman, Rebecca Lacey. Rebecca was an S worker, and Sean killed Rebecca because he believed that she had stolen $4 from him. He strangled her and dumped her body in a wooded area. When her body was discovered, because Rebecca was an S worker, they did not investigate and just assumed that she had overdosed or something. 1 year later, Sean entered a romantic relationship with this woman, Candace Cunningham. She had a substance addiction and recently had 2 children taken away by CPS. Sean killed her because he thought that she was pathetic, and in his mind, it was a mercy killing. Almost all of Sean's victims were mothers or shared some kind of similarity with his own mom, so it really does seem like he killed women that remind him of his own mother. 2 months later, he killed again. Each time, he's taking less and less time in between his victims. Elizabeth Griffith went to Sean's church. Yeah, Sean went to church this entire time. He claims that he's very religious. Elizabeth was said to be very naive, very trusting. She was childlike in a way and just really wanted friends. Sean lured Elizabeth to an abandoned house that he was staying in where he killed her. He also said that this was a mercy killing because she was struggling with her mental health. And he left her body in a closet of that same abandoned house. A few weeks later, Stacy Stanley was driving when she got a flat tire. She pulled into a gas station and Sean just so happened to be there. Sean offered to change Stacy's flat tire and she was so grateful. She asked him if there was anything she could do, like if he wanted money or something, because she was just so grateful. And he asked her just for a ride home. Sean brought Stacy back to that exact same abandoned house where he SA'd her and killed her and left her body in the basement. Not long after, Sean abducted another woman. Her identity is unknown, so we're just gonna call her B. B was a very religious woman. She went to the same church as Sean. Sean was really into B romantically, but B was not interested in Sean. B just wanted to be friends with Sean, so they would hang out sometimes. One day when they were hanging out, Sean asked B if she wanted to come over and read the Bible together. So he brought her back to that exact same abandoned building where he held her captive for 3 days. He did not feed her once the entire time for those 3 days. He was very violent with her. He would beat her and SA her in, quote, every way imaginable. And after 3 long days of all of this, Sean had fallen asleep next to B. He had her tied up, but she was able to break free, take his phone, and call 911.
911, what is the address to your emergency?
4th Street, Laundromat.
What's the problem?
I've been abducted.
What's your name? How do you spell your last name? Who abducted you?
Sean, great.
Where's she at now?
Asleep.
B had no idea where exactly she was, just a general idea, so officers are driving around looking for her, and then they finally see she had placed her hand on the window. B was saved and Sean was arrested. While in custody, police start asking Sean about Elizabeth's disappearance. They thought it was likely that he was involved because Elizabeth, Sean, and B all went to the same church. Realizing that it was only a matter of time before the police found Elizabeth and Stacy's bodies in the house that they just arrested him in, he confessed. Sean actually made a full confession of all 5 murders because he was really afraid of getting the death penalty, and he thought that if he cooperated that he would not get the death penalty, but he actually never made a plea deal. He just confessed willingly. Sean told police that they would find Elizabeth's body in the closet and Stacy's body in the basement. He also confessed to Candace's and Rebecca's murders as well as Dana's murder. But Sean actually didn't know Dana's name, and because she was a Jane Doe, it was really hard to identify his first victim. It actually took 3 years after Sean's confession to identify Dana's body 14 years after she was murdered. 14 years later, her family and children got closure. And Sean was sentenced to the death penalty plus 3 life sentences. His execution was actually scheduled for May 19th of this year, but it was delayed. And if you watched the end of this video, thank you so much for listening to the victims' stories in today's case. If any of you guys have any connection to the victims of Sean Gray, my heart truly goes out to each and every one of you. I want to hear all your opinions on this case in the comment section, but please remember to always be respectful because you don't know who is connected to the victims of the story. They could be on TikTok and they could be watching this video and be in the comment section. So just always be a good person.
If you were alive in the 90s, there is no way that you don't remember this case. It shocked and horrified people, especially men. I'm Mel Z. I do deep dives into death, true crime, and weird pop culture stuff. So if you're a weirdo too, follow me. On June 23rd, 1993, after years of abuse by her husband, John, Lorena Bobbitt did the unthinkable. I can't say it. I can't even say any kind of euphemism because this will get shut down. So you know what I'm saying. She cut it off. She cut it off. After a night where he had allegedly assaulted her, she went into the kitchen and grabbed a kitchen knife and then performed surgery while he was sleeping. She then left the house with 2 things that were really important to him, that and his Game Boy. She drove around with it in her hand and then eventually threw it out her car window into an empty field across from a 7-Eleven. She then called 911 and told them where they could find it. Police found it and were able to reattach it, and then the trial happened. This was a televised trial and it was complete chaos. There's no way that if you were alive, even if you were a child in the 90s, that you don't remember these names and faces, because whether you were actually watching the trial or you were just watching late night television, and late night hosts were constantly naming these people. There were references to them in movies. When you think about the 90s and crime, they're right up there with OJ and the Menendez brothers. During the trial, Lorena's lawyers argued that she had acted out of a moment of temporary insanity because of the abuse that she had endured, and the jury agreed. She was acquitted. John, who had denied the abuse allegations, was also acquitted in a separate trial. After recovering from the reattachment surgery, John entered the PORN world, where he had short-lived fame as that guy. He appeared in classy movies like John Wayne Bobbitt Uncut and made public appearances like this. In his private life, he faced multiple arrests for domestic violence and theft, and his life basically went downhill. Mostly, he's disappeared from the public eye. Lorena, on the other hand, has actually done some pretty meaningful things. She's an advocate for survivors of domestic violence, and through her foundation, she helps women escape abusive relationships and works to raise awareness about SA and domestic violence. A 90s hero, isn't she?
Just when I thought I heard about all the worst cults in history, this one had to come and blow them out of the water. This is Colonia Dignidad. They were a German torture cult hiding out in the Chilean wilderness after World War II, aka Yazis. And to show you how terrible they were, let me tell you a story. And as a quick reminder, if you want more info, you can check out the podcast. The leader of this cult was a known child abuser, and he wanted more Chilean boys to be brought to him. So he started a hospital in the community and used it as a trafficking system to get more children. One day, a young Chilean boy choked and was rushed to the hospital. And right when he got there, a nurse scooped him up, brought him to a room, and saved his life. But later that day, his sister arrived and asked a nurse when she could pick him up to take him home. And the nurse responded that they needed to monitor him for a few more days, which is pretty suspect in a choking case. So a few days later, she comes back and she's like, "Okay, can I get my brother?" And the nurse tells her that he's not there anymore. And this is because the hospital had lawyers on staff that were drafting up adoption paperwork when young boys would come in. The cult was able to legally adopt boys in the community without the parents' consent, and the parents had not enough money to do anything about it. There are so many more stories about this place, and I had never heard of it before.
This 15-year-old girl is a terrifying killer that bragged about what she did in her diary. Alyssa Bustamante was literally born into chaos and trouble. Her parents were literally cousins that got pregnant with Alyssa when they were only teenagers themselves. They were both substance users. Her mom was neglectful. Her dad was abusive. When Alyssa was 9 years old, her dad was in prison and her mom was just high all of the time. So she was actually removed out of the home with her 3 younger siblings and placed in the custody of her grandparents. Her grandparents really wanted to give these kids like a good fresh start. So they moved them from California to a small town in Missouri called St. Martin's. But at that point, it was almost too late for Alyssa. Alyssa was only 9 years old, but she was in serious need of some therapy. She was super hateful and aggressive and angry and violent. And the older Alyssa got, the more she rebelled. She started dressing in like an emo aesthetic. She was posting some like really disturbing things on MySpace, which was like the popular social media at the time. It could have all been a cry for help. I mean, like on one hand, having really strong emotions as a teenage girl, Alyssa is like 14, 15 at this point, that's normal. But what isn't normal is around this time, Alyssa started to tell her friends that she was fantasizing about what it would be like to unalive someone. And then tragically on October 21st, 2009, Alyssa made those dark, twisted fantasies come true. That was the day that Alyssa planned that she was going to take someone's life. Early in the day, Alyssa went into the wooden area behind her home and dug a hole that would serve as a grave for her victim. Then as it started to get dark out, Alyssa's twisted plan went into effect. Alyssa, who remembers only 15 years old at the time, brought her 6-year-old sister Emma out to play. Alyssa then instructed her 6-year-old sister Emma to go 4 houses down and invite their 9-year-old neighbor Elizabeth Olton out to play. Little 6-year-old Emma was so young and naive, she probably thought that it was cool that her older sister wanted to play with her and her friend Elizabeth. I mean, Alyssa was always kind of mean and kind of abusive towards Emma, and now she wanted to play with her. Emma had no idea that what she was actually doing was luring one of her best friends to be brutally unalived by her own big sister. Elizabeth Olton's mother didn't even want Elizabeth to go out to play because they were about to settle down for dinner. But you know how little girls are, they were really persistent about wanting to play together. So eventually, Elizabeth's mother reluctantly agreed as long as she would be back in 1 hour for dinner. But tragically, little 9-year-old Elizabeth Olton would never make it back home. When Elizabeth and Emma came running, back to Alyssa and Emma's home to play with Alyssa, Alyssa immediately ordered Emma to go home, and then she lured little Elizabeth into the woods where she had dug her grave a couple hours earlier. And that is where 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante brutally unalived 9-year-old Elizabeth Olton. What Alyssa had just done seemed to barely even faze her. She excitedly ran home and wrote about it in her diary. I'm gonna put what Alyssa wrote in her diary on the screen now. She describes what she had just done moments earlier to this little 9-year-old girl that she knew. It was one of her sister's best friends. They played together all the time. Elizabeth only lived 4 houses down. And then after she wrote what she did to her, she wrote, "I don't know how to feel at the moment. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the, oh my God, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kind of nervous and shaky though right now. Okay, I gotta go to church now. LOL." There aren't even words to describe that. It's horrifying and disgusting. When Elizabeth never made it home at 6 p.m. for dinner, her mom immediately knew that something terrible happened. And within 24 hours, the investigators learned that the last person to be seen with 9-year-old Elizabeth was her 15-year-old neighbor. The investigators searched Alyssa's room while she was at school. They told, her parents that I think that she was just a witness at that point. And that is when they found Alyssa's diary. And it was full of really, really dark and disturbing entries. But the investigators were most interested about the diary entry that was made on the day that Elizabeth went missing. and they saw that it had been completely scribbled over in pen to hide what Alyssa had written that day. They were able to recover what had been written before it was scribbled over, and that was the entry I just read to you. And that is when Alyssa was finally brought into questioning for the disappearance and possible unaliving of Elizabeth Olten. I truly think that Alyssa thought that she was smart and covered her tracks and that she was going to get away with it. She seemed not nervous at all being questioned by these detectives until they mentioned her diary. And that is when her story completely changed from I have no idea what happened to yes, I was playing with Elizabeth, we were playing in the woods, and Elizabeth had accidentally fallen, hit in her head, and passed away. And that is when the investigators asked Alyssa one more question. And Alyssa's response to that question completely broke her grandmother, who was in the room. I mean, this poor woman, she thought that she was only bringing her granddaughter in as a witness. She had no idea what her granddaughter could be capable of. She thought that this was the little girl that she had saved, and to learn that she was the reason why their little missing neighbor was missing, it completely broke her, and I'll show you that footage now.
How did she die? 9-year-old girls don't just die.
She fell back and hit her head.
Was her throat cut?
Yeah. Oh. Oh my God. Oh.
That is when Alyssa made a full confession and she was sentenced to life in prison. But if you think that's where this case ends, you are sadly mistaken, because there's a really, really recent, disturbing, dark update in this case. But before I get into that disgusting update, I do want to take a moment to talk about Elizabeth and the other people that were affected in this case. I cannot stop thinking about Elizabeth's poor mother and Alyssa's little sister. I couldn't even begin to imagine the regret and the guilt. I mean, Elizabeth's mother didn't even want her to go out to play that day. And then Alyssa's little sister, she was only 6, and she was the one used to lure her friend to be unalived. She would be about 21 years old now, and both of them, everyone affected in this case, are definitely in my thoughts. I'm completely heartbroken for both of them, and I hope everyone in this case knows that it's not their fault. The only person at fault here is, of course, Alyssa Bustamante. Elizabeth Olten was only 9 years old when her life was stolen from her in the most terrible and terrifying way. This was a little girl who loved animals and music. She was a huge Taylor Swift and Hannah Montana fan. And, she was really excited at the time, and her only big worry was that she had just scored a lead in the school musical. And then her life was just stolen from her in such a senseless, terrifying way. It's in remembrance for the way that Elizabeth Olten's life was stolen from her that truly horrifies people with the recent update in this case. In 2021, a new bill was passed in Missouri that gives any minor that was sentenced to life in prison a chance of parole after 15 years, which means Alyssa has a chance for parole in July of 2024, which is now. I'm putting this video up on July 1st, 2024. This bill obviously came with a lot of criticism and backlash, especially regarding Alyssa Bustamante. So a state representative actually made a statement saying that this bill was not created for minors that committed crimes like Alyssa, and that it should not and would not apply to her. Personally, I don't think that she has a chance of getting out anytime soon, if ever, but I guess we will have to wait and see. If you watched to the end of this video, thank you so much for listening to Elizabeth Olten's story. I feel like so often she's lost in her own case. So if you watch the end, let me know.
He got his own daughter pregnant twice before wiping out his entire family. And yes, I wish I was exaggerating, but this is Ronald G. Simmons. Welcome to my series, Serial Killers from Every State. And for this one, we are going to Arkansas. And please take this as your warning, because this one is the definition of pure evil. By age 10, Ronald was already tormenting everyone around him. His siblings said that he was worse than a bully. family. He literally beat the family cat so badly that he became violent just to survive. No, that's actually so sad. He was the kind of kid that will death stare you until you just squirm, and as he got older, it only escalated. His parents sent him to boarding schools. They dumped him at relatives' houses. They tried everything, but Ronald did not want help. He wanted control. And when he married a woman named Becky, he got exactly that. She couldn't wear makeup, couldn't cut her hair, couldn't drive, couldn't call her family, or even mail letters unless a neighbor secretly helped her. He isolated her until she was literally just a shadow walking along their house. But all that evil wasn't just directed at his wife, because it turns out he had been openly abusing his daughter Shayla, and not just once, but multiple times. People started noticing how close he acted towards her, like too close. She would be sitting on his lap, he'd be touching her, giving her like these weird kisses, and not like a daughter, but like a girlfriend. And then came the pregnancy. She gave birth to a little girl named Sylvia, who was both Ronald's granddaughter and daughter. And yes, it was that twisted. When they got investigated, he got hit with 3 incest charges, but instead of facing trial, Ronald packed up the family and vanished. No charges, no jail time, not even a real record. He moved them off-grid to Arkansas, where he built an actual fortress. No phone, no plumbing, no contact with the outside world, just a block of concrete as a bunker wrapped in barbed wire. And that's where the abuse just kept on going. Sheila got pregnant again, but this time she had an abortion. His wife Becky couldn't even sleep in the same bed as him anymore, and the older kids dipped as soon as they were old enough to. But then came Christmas, and Ronald had a plan. Weeks before the holiday, Ronald had made the kids dig a giant hole in the yard. He said it was for a new outhouse, but now we know it wasn't. Because on December 22nd, Ronald got up and took the life of his wife Becky and his oldest son Gene. Then he grabbed his 3-year-old granddaughter Barbara and unalived her with his bare hands, dumping them all into the same pit they just dug weeks ago. But he wasn't done. I mean, it gets wild. 4 of his other kids were still in school, so he waited. They came home still in their school clothes. One of them had a lunch ticket in her pocket, and the other one was chewing gum. He separated each of them and unalived them one by one, shoving their heads into water barrels before dumping them in the same pit. And then he just sat there alone inside of that house, surrounded by silence, punching holes in the walls, drinking his life away. Because this was only phase 1. December 26th, more family arrived. His grown kids, their spouses, their babies. Ronald starts by unaliving his son Billy and his wife Retna, and then their baby Trey. He was barely a toddler, and Ronald drowned him in a barrel of water like it meant nothing to him. And then came Sheila, the daughter that he groomed and abused for years. He took her life with no regret, along with her husband Dennis. Then he picked up his 1-year-old grandson Michael and 7-year-old granddaughter Sylvia. Yes, that Sylvia, his grandchild and child. He ended both their lives right there with his bare hands, and then arranged their bodies on the living room floor like decoration. He covered them with coats, except for Sheila. He used Becky's Beth tablecloth for her. And then the babies were wrapped up in plastic and placed inside of cars in the driveway. He then left, picked up a few Christmas presents that he had ordered, went to the club, had some drinks, and came back like nothing happened. 2 days later, he wrote letters to his family. He stuffed cash inside of the envelopes and said, "Keep this in remembrance of us." Then got dressed, grabbed his weapons, and went to town. His first stop, a woman named Kathy Kendrick. He worked with her. She rejected him, so he walked into the store and shooted her right in the head. Next stop was his old job at an oil company. He tried to unalive his boss. He missed, but a delivery driver named James Chaffin wasn't so lucky. He lost his life in the hospital because of a stray bullet from Ronald. But then he drives to a convenience store. He shooted the owner and injured another employee, all while smiling. This dude is nuts. He walks out, gets in his car, and drives to the last spot on his list, his old job at a freight company. He walks in with a pointed weapon and shooted his supervisor. Thankfully, she survived, but she did end up permanently disabled. After all of this, he just sat down right on the floor. He handed the phone to an employee and told her to call the police, all while saying, "I've done everything I wanted to do. It's all over now." That was it. After all that, you would expect a more dramatic exit scene. But he did not resist. He didn't want a lawyer, and when they gave him the death penalty, he literally said, "Just kill me." And that's exactly what they did. In 1990, he passed away from lethal injection. 16 lives were lost that week, 14 being his own flesh and blood. And what haunts me the most is that this all started way before a trigger was ever pulled. The real horror is what he inflicted on that family for years behind closed doors. I wish I was a fly on the wall. These cases get to a certain point, man. Thank you guys so much for still being here with me and listening. I told you, I warned you, pure definition of evil.
Hit that subscribe button to join a community that refuses to forget. Like this video to keep these stories alive. Share it to spread awareness, and drop a comment with your thoughts. Who do you think was really behind it, or what part shocked you most?